This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Company. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is the Ventures Fly Co. Institute for Advanced Angling Studies, where we never hand out degrees because the learning never stops. Yep, this is the place to learn about fly fishing. Hopefully learn something about your fellow fly fishers as well. Seriously though, welcome to it, folks. This is Untangled, and I am your host, Spencer Durrant. We got a great show lined up for you tonight. We're talking small stream fly fishing, split shot, and bobbins. It does not get more exciting than that. I believe the kids these days might even call it lit. I'm not sure why, but I would probably classify this as a lit show. That's just my day job's teaching high school. And kids say some things sometimes, and that's one of the things they say. So that's what the show's going to be. So definitely stick around to all those questions. And we really appreciate all the questions that we've gotten from folks. There've been some really solid questions coming across the desk lately. So if you do have a question about fly fishing that you'd like answered, please don't forget, go ahead, submit that in to us. There's a link in the podcast description. There's also a link that goes out every week in our emails from VFC, and it's like basically the best email ever. So if you're not getting it, I feel bad for you. It's one of the few emails that I actually read. I don't read emails. Ask anybody who's ever worked with me. It is a problem that I have. But that's what the show's going to be tonight. So hopefully you'll stick around for the whole thing. Now, let's just jump right into it. Okay. Our first question is from Dean from Texas. Dean says, I live in North Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth area, and fish small urban creeks for perch, bass, or anything swimming there. I use a 6-foot 7-inch 3-weight rod and would love some tips and tricks you can provide for casting in small, tight water and what types of rig I should be trying. A dry nymph, 2 dries, 2 nymphs, streamers, etc. Thanks. Love the show. Dean, I love that you love the show. I really do. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. So thank you, Dean, for taking the time to put that question together. This is a really good question. I grew up fishing small streams here in the Rockies. That's kind of been I don't want to say bread and butter because it makes me sound arrogant. And I don't want to come off as like, I certainly don't know everything, I guess is what I want to say there. But I do feel very at home on the small streams. These are the kinds of places that, you know, if you said, oh, you can go fish something like the Madison or this little unnamed creek for the rest of your life, I'd probably pick the unnamed little creek just because that's where I'm comfortable. That's how I learned to fish, where I learned to fish. That's just the stuff that I know and feel good tackling, or if you'll forgive the pun there. Hopefully some of these lessons translate. There is a ton of great videos as well out there. I've linked a couple of those in the description, but we're going to go over some of those tips here. All right. Now, the first thing that I'll advise is, especially if you're on small water, usually when we talk about small water, we're talking about water that's really brushy, that's got a lot of trees close by. You don't have room to make a proper fly cast. You know, everybody reviews these fly rods. They're like, oh, my fly rod can knock the wings off a mayfly at 85 feet. I'm like, cool. I cast like 20 feet on a good day if I need to, just because of the nature of where I'm fishing. I don't need to throw those kinds of casts all the time. I get kind of lucky in that sense that I don't really need to do it. So, one thing though here is that you want to get your flies where they need to be in as few casts as possible, right? The less that you have to cast, the fewer opportunities that you give yourself to hang up on like every tree and bush on the stream, especially on small water. You don't need to false cast very much. It was told to me by somebody in the fly fishing business that, you know, the really great anglers can get any fly to any fish 3 casts or less. And I really believe that. I think that through, and I think about all the great anglers that I know, the guys who just can, you know, pull fish out of a storm drain, right? They're that good. And they do all have that ability. They get the fly where it needs to go, and they don't waste a cast. You don't need a ton of false casts for most fly fishing at all, especially small stream fishing. Now, something else that you're going to hear from just about any small stream expert is to learn how to utilize that roll cast. Roll casts are awesome for small streams because they almost eliminate the need for a back cast. If you don't have room for a back cast, bust out that roll cast and just roll that fly right on in to wherever the fish is waiting for it. Okay, roll casts are great. It can be kind of tricky in tight water just because your rod might not load a roll cast real great that's super short, so you might have to experiment with the instances where your rod behaves the best on a roll cast. But most smaller rods, like you mentioned here, Dean, they do have a pretty good ability to roll cast even in tight situations like that. So definitely practice that roll cast of yours. You want that to be like your go-to, like that's your secret weapon almost, especially on small streams. I roll cast a ton on small streams. The little stream here by my house in Wyoming, there's one pool. I fished it. I think like right at the beginning of October. It was right when deer season started, so it was right about beginning of October, and I caught. It was a weird day because I caught like 10 fish from one hole, which is not common on this little stream. And the whole time I was just roll casting. I get to the end of the drift and I just roll cast straight up to the top of the pool and bring it down, pluck another one up. I use that roll cast all the time. And the best anglers that I know that they use the roll cast all the time. It's just a handy tool to have kicking around. And another thing that you'll want to learn for fishing small streams is learn how to dap your flies. This is something that Tom Rosenbauer brings up in one of the Orbis small stream fishing guides. I would recommend watching those. They're great. And Tom is certainly the fellow to learn from. Okay, that guy could catch fish out of a mud puddle, I swear. But really, dapping flies is exactly what it sounds like. Okay, you kind of sneak up to a good-looking spot and you just stick your rod out, just drop those flies. You're hardly even casting. It's just you just lay your line out there and just drop those flies right on the water. You don't even really want leader on the water in this instant. You're just dapping your flies. So you just reach out, just drop them down, and just follow the drift down with the rod tip. And a lot of times, especially on small water, fish see something like that, they'll just come up and hit it like a freight train. So that's really good if you've got a super tight pocket where you can't do much, especially cast. You just don't have the room to move that fly rod. Then dapping your flies is certainly a technique that I would learn if I'm on small streams. And that also reinforces another idea that Tom Rosenbauer brings up. You rarely cast more than your leader on small water. So think about that for a second. You rarely cast more than your leader. Yeah, a lot of your casts on small water aren't going to be, more than 10, 15 feet away. So you're rarely going to have more than just like a foot or two of fly line out the tip of your rod and then your leader and your flies. That's kind of the way that I like to cast as well. I kind of aim for that. I have, like I said, about a foot, 2 foot of fly line out, just because it's harder to cast your leader. Sometimes it just doesn't give enough weight without that fly line out. So I have a little bit of fly line out just to give a little bit of weight to the rod. And then it's just a real short. It's almost, if you've seen videos of how folks cast their Euro rigs, it's that same concept where it's just kind of that flick of the wrist and you're keeping everything really high. You're keeping a lot of line off the water and you just cast not much more than your leader. It's kind of awkward, but it's something that you get a feel for the more that you do it. But that was an insight that Tom brought up that I think is really worth remembering. You don't need to cast a whole lot of your fly line, especially on small streams. You don't need much more than just your leader out of there. Now, as far as rigs, honestly, it depends on what you're fishing for. All right. I've always been partial to a dry dropper. That's just, again, that's how I grew up fishing, was dry dropper fishing. But that does seem to be a favorite of folks on small streams because it covers so much of the water in small streams. Small streams don't usually have the depth or the wide variety of crazy water types that you'll see on a bigger river. Usually it's tight pockets or pools on these smaller streams. So if you have one nymph that's down fairly deep, you've got a dry fly, you've really just kind of covered the two zones that the fish are going to be looking to find food in, right on top and then somewhere subsurface. So that's a really good rig. A lot of expert anglers do recommend going with a dry dropper rig. I honestly don't even remember the time that I fished only nymphs on a small stream. And I've also found that trout in particular are a lot more willing to eat off the top in a small river. So I like to give them the opportunity to do that. That's one of my favorite ways to fish. You, Dean, specifically asked about like perch and bass and whatnot. In that instance, yeah, definitely go for a nymph under an indicator or two nymphs under an indicator for that matter. Just make sure your indicator is not too big. We've discussed that in a couple episodes already. But that was a great question, Dean. Thank you very much for helping us kick this episode off. If you want to learn more about fly fishing, sure, you could Google it. Sure, you could ask that old person down the street if they know about it. And sure, you could just go out there and stand in the river waving a stick and hope that something happens. Or you could do the intelligent thing and ask a question on the Untangled podcast, where your questions about fly fishing are answered in rich, excruciating detail that help you become a better angler. So, what are you waiting for? Improve your fly fishing skills today. Click the link in the podcast description, submit a question, and become a better angler. So the next question tonight, also from Dallas, Texas. I wasn't aware there was this much fly fishing or interest, I guess, in fly fishing down in that neck of the woods. That's pretty cool. Brian from Dallas, Texas asks, regarding weighting flies, those beads on them don't seem very natural looking, but trout still bite them. Is there a problem with putting a split shot immediately in front of the fly instead of a few inches ahead of it? I mean, nothing is more unnatural than the hook bend and point sticking out. Thanks for considering this. Right, this is a question that actually took me some time really to find an answer on this one, because there's a lot of information out there about, you need to put your split shot above the fly, or it should go in between your two flies if you're fishing two nymphs. And everybody's got an opinion on that, and we could dive into that probably at a later date. But my first inclination for answering this question here, Brian, after thinking on it and consulting with some of the other angling experts that I know, and just trying to figure out, why don't we put it right there? My very first inclination was that we avoid putting split shot too close to the fly, because we're all about trying to get a natural drift, right? With that much weight immediately on the fly, the drift wouldn't look or feel as natural as a real bug would. So the fish are going to wise up to that pretty quick. And I did some more researching, like I said. And the other reason that you might want to avoid putting split shot right on your fly is that doing so is going to put your fly directly on the bottom. It'll sort of drop like a rocket straight to the bottom of the riverbed instead of drifting naturally, kind of like it should. All right. The closer your weight is to your fly, the more quickly that fly sinks. Often you want your flies ticking just above the bottom of the river, so your split shot often sinks a bit quicker than your flies, leaving your flies to bounce just a bit higher than the weight does. All right. So envision for a minute like there's a giant V. All right. The bottom point of that V is where you want your weight, and then on the up end of one of the up ends of the V is where your flies are going to be. So the weight is sitting down on the bottom more because it's denser. It's going to fall a lot quicker than your flies, and it's kind of bouncing along the bottom. Your flies aren't going to be on the same level. They're going to be like in that V shape, right? Your weight's going to be at the bottom point of the V, and then on one of the up points of the V, that's where your flies are going to be, just kind of ticking along, not all the way on the bottom, but very close to the bottom. That's what we're aiming for when we're putting a nymph rig together. And if you put the split shot right there on top of those flies, it's just going to sink them super quick, and we're going to run into issues where you're not able to get that natural drift, right? That's what we're all about in fly fishing, is getting that natural drift. And then another reason why we want to avoid doing this is when a fish goes to take your fly, if they feel some odd resistance or extra weight, they'll probably just spit that out before you can set the hook, right? Trout know what a nymph should and shouldn't feel like, and they wise up to that very quickly. Okay, growing up, I always put on way too much split shot on my nymph rigs, and I never understood why I didn't catch fish. I'd go out with some of my buddies who fly fished, and they'd be into fish all the time, and I just would be picking salad off my flies. All right, I had too much weight on, so it wasn't a very natural drift. The fish would go to take it, and they'd feel the resistance of that weight, and they'd be out of there. Okay, they'd just say, I'm done. That doesn't feel right. They realize very quickly that's not natural. Fish know what is and what isn't natural, and they're not going to waste their time on something that's not natural, right? Again, I just want to reiterate this point. The goal of fly fishing is to achieve that natural drift, and that's really hard to do if your split shot is right in front of your flies. You need those flies bouncing along, not sinking just like a rock. I know there's a big push right now in fly design to get them to sink super quickly and to get them into the strike zone very quickly. And I'm not knocking that part of it, but a lot of that comes from the Euro nymphing section. And the thing that's nice about Euro nymphing, yes, you do want your flies to get down to that strike zone quickly because they're going to spend more time down there. But Euro nymphers are very, very good at controlling the depth of where their flies are at and how they're drifting through the water column. Again, they're getting that much more natural drift because of the way a Euro rig is set up. It's going to come in drifting naturally, even if those flies sink quickly. So hopefully that makes sense. I know that's kind of a lot all to take in, but really, like I said, just bring it all back to that. How can I get the most natural drift possible? And if you do that, then you're going to be fine. Man, this episode is just flying by because we are right on the precipice of our last question. And this one comes to us, Joe from New Hampshire. He says, when it comes to fly tying, I find there are different sized bobbins or bobbin holders, whichever you call them. Could you explain the different uses for each overall and different size tube diameters? Is there a preferred size for small, medium, and larger size flies? Thank you, and liking these new videos. Joe, thanks a bunch. Glad that you're liking the videos. We're having a lot of fun putting these videos together. It's fun just coming up with new stuff to show. So some cool stuff here, though. VFC is actually coming out with a bunch of tying materials and supplies. We've got a whole kit on the way. We've got feathers. We've got dubbing. Alex, our gear guru, showed me pictures of the kilograms of dubbing, which, I mean, there's no way to tell how much a kilogram is in pounds. There's no way to convert that. So, I mean, he could be talking about an ounce or 800 tons. There's just no way to know. All right. But we're coming out with all this stuff. And Alex spent a ton of time not only looking at dubbing, also looking at bobbins, right? He spent more time looking at gear for fly tying than I have. And so I spent some time bugging Alex about this. He's probably sick of talking or thinking about bobbins because he spent the time to like, okay, what do people want in a bobbin? And he researched that. And he's read more product reviews and talked to more people about what they want in bobbins than I never would have given it that much thought. So Alex was a guy that I really wanted to bug about this topic. So I asked him, what's the deal? What's up with different bobbin sizes? Because I honestly didn't even pay much attention to that. I mean, I knew that they were really out there, but it wasn't something that I consciously thought about. So what it really boils down to after talking to Alex and doing a little bit of research on my own is you've got different bobbin sizes based on the size of the size of the fly that you're tying. See, size of the tie that I'm flying. You will do that so many times as a fly angler, and it just happens. So just roll with it, mixing up tie flying and fly tying. It's one of the endearing natures of being in this business. But anyways, when you're tying bigger flies, you want a larger bobbin because it'll help keep your hands from knocking into the point of the hook in your vise, right? Because you've got a longer tube that your thread goes through, so it keeps like your knuckles away from that big hook point. And as somebody who has had more than his fair share of hooks stuck in his fingers, I can say that keeping your fingers away from hook points is always a good idea. All right. Smaller bobbins work really great for smaller flies because it's less weight that you have to spin around a smaller hook. Looking on some forums as well, I found that there are some folks who say there's a difference balance-wise between a smaller bobbin and a larger bobbin. I don't know how true that is. I just have like a standard size bobbin. I had it sitting on my tying desk right behind me, but I think I cleaned my tying desk, which never trust an angler with a clean tying desk because nobody has a clean tying desk. Okay. It's not yet messy. That's all it is. All right. So the couple of things that you do want to be aware of with bobbins is definitely get the ones that are ceramic lined tubes, because if you use the hard metal tubes, I use these forever. My grandpa tied flies for years. He was a commercial tyer for almost 30 years, I believe. And I inherited a bunch of his tying supplies, and all of his bobbins were metal tube bobbins, and I was breaking thread left and right with those things. I finally broke down and spent like $10 on a ceramic bobbin, and I don't have issues with thread breaking off anymore because that ceramic lined tube doesn't cut into the thread the way that a metal tube does. So that would be the big thing that I would recommend looking at with your bobbins, and then just picking a size based on, excuse me, just picking a size based on the flies that you most often tie. So just your standard trout bobbin's probably going to work great. I just got an off the shelf bobbin, probably from Tiemco or Umpqua or something. Just their standard one that I've used for years, never had issues with it. And that's the size the ones in the VFC tying kits are going to be as well. You'll be well taken care of there. And folks, that does it for us today. Again, really, really appreciate everybody who takes the time to submit questions. Okay, this show doesn't exist without you guys taking the time to ask us questions. I'm enjoying this a bunch, just getting the chance to honestly learn some things that I haven't learned before, right? Like I've said before, I don't claim to be any kind of expert. I just happen to be somebody who's really in love with fly fishing, and I love teaching this stuff to other people and helping everybody learn. And that's one of the goals of this show, is just how can we make everybody around us better? How can we share this knowledge, make it accessible? So thank you everybody who submitted a question. One last reminder, if you do have questions that you would like answered, there's a link in the podcast description to submit your questions. Now, until next week, tie lines, everybody.